The rain hammered the diner's tin roof like 1,000 frantic heartbeats, turning the empty parking lot into a blurred mirror of sodium lights. It was just past 2 a.m. in the forgotten stretch of highway between nowhere and regret, the kind of place where truckers nursed black coffee and ghosts lingered in the steam rising from forgotten plates. Duke Razor Callahan pushed through the door, his leather jacket slick with water, the faint scent of wet asphalt and engine oil clinging to him like an old scar. At 6'4", and built like a storm cloud, he was the kind of man who made shadows retreat. Tattoos snaking up his arms like barbed wire, a jaw set from too many unspoken battles, and eyes that had seen the world break and not blinked. The diner was a relic. Fluorescent buzz humming over cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox silent as a grave. Only 3 souls occupied the space. A weary waitress wiping the counter with mechanical swipes, a hulking figure in a stained flannel shirt nursing a beer at the far end, and a small girl, no more than 8, huddled in a booth by the window, her thin frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie. She looked up as the bell jingled, her eyes wide and hollow, like polished stones, in a face too pale for the summer heat that had baked this desert town dry months ago. Duke slid onto a stool at the counter, the leather of his chaps creaking softly. He nodded to the waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired lines etched around her mouth, and ordered black coffee, no sugar. The man in the flannel, broad-shouldered with a greasy beard and a fidgety glance toward the door, didn't look up, but the air shifted, thick with the unspoken weight of strangers sharing space in the dead of night. Duke's calloused fingers drummed once on the formica, a habit from long rides where silence was the only companion. That's when the girl moved. She slipped from her booth like a shadow detaching from the wall, bare feet padding silently across the checkered floor. No shoes, Duke noted, his gaze flicking down. Mud flecks on her ankles, as if she'd been pulled through underbrush. She stopped beside him, clutching a crumpled napkin in her small fist, her breath coming in shallow hitches. Up close, she was all sharp angles, tangled brown hair, a bruise blooming faintly on her cheek like a shadow of thundercloud. She extended the napkin toward him, her hand trembling, eyes locked on his with a desperation that cut through the rain's roar outside. He unfolded it slowly, the paper damp and ink-smeared. In childish scrawl, just 5 words. "Help, he's not my daddy." The diner seemed to hold its breath. Duke's coffee arrived with a soft clink, but he didn't touch it. His mind flashed to a memory buried deep, a dusty road in another life, a promise whispered over a fallen comrade's grave. No one gets left behind, not on my watch. That vow had pulled him from the ashes of his own losses, forged him into the road warrior who led the Iron Vipers, a crew of scarred souls bound by loyalty thicker than blood. The man in the flannel shifted, his chair scraping like a warning. "Mia," he growled, voice low and edged with false warmth. "Come back here, sugar. Stranger danger, remember?" But the girl, Mia, didn't budge. She pressed closer to Duke's side, her tiny fingers brushing his arm, seeking anchor in the storm of his presence. Duke's jaw tightened, the old fire igniting in his chest. He folded the napkin once, slipped it into his vest pocket, and rose without a word. The waitress froze, her rag dripping forgotten onto the counter. Duke crossed to the door in 3 strides, the floorboards groaning under his boots. He turned the lock with a decisive click, the sound echoing like a gavel in the quiet. Rain lashed the windows harder, as if the night itself approved. The man stood now, chair toppling with a crash. "What the hell you think you're doing, biker boy?" His face twisted, eyes darting to the exits, but Duke was already between him and Mia, a wall of leather and resolve. "Stay put," Duke said, voice gravel rough from years of wind-whipped shouts, but calm as the eye of a hurricane. He glanced at the waitress, jerking his chin toward the phone behind the counter. "Call it in, quiet like. Tell him we've got a situation." The waitress nodded, her hand shaking as she dialed, whispering into the receiver about a child in distress, a stranger's shadow. Mia clung to Duke's leg now, her sobs muffled against his jeans. The scent of fear, sharp and metallic, mixing with the diner's greasy air. The man lunged forward, but Duke's hand shot out, pinning him against the booth with effortless strength. Not a punch, not a shout, just unyielding pressure, like the grip of fate catching up. "You touch her, you don't walk out of here," Duke murmured, close enough to see the sweat bead on the man's brow. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, echoing the one that had rebuilt him after the war took his brother, after the bottle nearly claimed his soul. The Iron Vipers weren't just a club. They were his chosen family, riders who honored the broken code of the world with fists and fury when words failed. One call from him, and the highway would rumble with Harleys, brothers converging like wolves to the pack's call. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then growing, cutting through the rain like a lifeline. The man slumped, muttering curses, his facade cracking under the weight of exposure. Mia looked up at Duke, her eyes searching his face for the hero she dared to summon. "He took me," she whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. "From my real mommy. Said he'd hurt her if I told." Duke knelt, his massive frame folding gently, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You told the right one, kid. That's the first step." Outside, headlights pierced the downpour, squad cars skidding into the lot, red and blue lights painting the diner in fractured hope. The door rattled as officers pounded, but Duke held his ground, shielding her until the world caught up. As the authorities burst in, cuffing the imposter and wrapping Mia in a blanket, Duke stepped back into the shadows, his work done for now. But the napkin burned in his pocket, a spark to a larger fire. He knew this wasn't over. The girl's story unraveled threads to a darker web, one that tested promises old and new. The rain eased as dawn crept over the horizon, gilding the chrome on his bike waiting in the lot. Duke fired up the engine, the roar of vow renewed. Justice wasn't loud, it was the quiet lock of a door, the stand of one against the storm. The waitress watched him go, coffee pot trembling in her hand. "Who are you?" she called, but he was already rolling out, the highway swallowing him whole. In the rear view, Mia waved from the ambulance, a tiny hand against the glass, a bond forged in midnight ink, pulling him toward redemption's edge. The Vipers would ride soon, for her, for the promise, and in a world of broken oaths, that was enough to shake the foundations. The highway unspooled like a black ribbon under Duke's tires, the rain-slicked asphalt reflecting the first hesitant streaks of dawn. His Harley thrummed beneath him, a low growl that vibrated through his bones, chasing away the chill that had settled in the diner. The napkin, folded tight in his vest pocket, felt heavier than the miles he'd already logged that night, 5 words that echoed his brother's last breath on a distant battlefield. "Watch the small ones, Duke. They break easiest." That promise had been the anchor pulling him from the wreckage of war, from nights blurred by whiskey and regret into the brotherhood of the Iron Vipers. Now it tugged him forward, toward whatever shadows Mia's plea had stirred. He pulled over at a roadside overlook, the engine's rumble fading to a whisper as he killed the ignition. The desert stretched out below, vast and unforgiving, dotted with saguaros like silent sentinels under the paling sky. Duke fished out his phone, the screen glowing harsh against the dim light. One call, that's all it would take. The Vipers were scattered across the state, but loyalty didn't know distance. It was the code that bound them, ex-soldiers and wanderers who'd traded badges for patches, finding family in the roar of engines and the weight of shared scars. "Preacher," Duke said when the line connected, his voice cutting through the static like gravel over silk. Preacher, real name Elias Thorne, was the club's chaplain, a lanky vet with a Bible in one saddlebag and a wrench in the other, his calm a counterpoint to Duke's storm. "You up?" A chuckle rasped back, laced with the clink of tools. "Son's not, but I am. What's the word, Razor? Sound like you've got ghosts riding shotgun." Duke leaned against his bike, the metal still warm from the ride, inhaling the sharp tang of wet sagebrush. He recounted the diner in clipped sentences, the girl, the note, the man's crumbling mask. Omitted the bruise on her cheek, the way her eyes had mirrored his own long-ago terror. Some pains were too raw to voice over a wire. "She's safe for now, but this ain't random. Kid said he threatened her mom. Smells like a bigger mess." Preacher went quiet, the pause heavy with understanding. They'd seen it before. Lost kids tangled in webs of desperation, pulling good men under. "You locking in? Crew's scattered, but I can rally 'em. Jax is in Tucson. Lena's patching up strays in Phoenix. Full muster." Duke's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun bled orange across the ridges. Mia's whisper replayed, "He took me." It stirred the old fire, the one that had forged the Vipers from ashes after his brother's unit got ambushed, leaving him with a limp and a lifetime vow. No one left behind, not soldiers, not strays, not the vulnerable caught in the crossfire of a cynical world. "Yeah, tell 'em to gear up. We ride at noon. And Preacher, dig quiet. See if this ties to anything local, missing kids, bad actors." The call ended with a promise of its own, wheels turning, brothers converging. Duke pocketed the phone and fired up the engine again, the exhaust popping like distant thunder. The road called him south, toward the Viper's outpost in the Badlands, a weathered garage hidden behind a facade of junkyard relics, where Harleys slept in rows and stories unfolded over campfires. As he rode, the wind whipped his face, carrying the faint salt of approaching ocean air mixed with the ever-present bite of exhaust. Memories flickered like roadside signs, his brother laughing over a shared flask, the explosion that stole him, the hospital room where Duke swore his oath amid beeping monitors and sterile regret. By mid-morning, the sun hung high, baking the asphalt into a shimmering haze. Duke rolled into the outpost, gravel crunching under his tires as a dozen bikes gleamed in the yard, chrome catching the light like polished armor. The crew was already gathering. Jax, the enforcer with a shaved head, and a laugh like a shotgun blast, wrenching on his custom chopper. Lena, the medic, a fierce woman with ink-sleeved arms and a healer's touch, sorting supplies in the shade of a mesquite tree. Preacher stood at the garage door, arms crossed, his leather vest patched with the Viper insignia, a coiled serpent around a broken chain, symbol of bonds that couldn't be forged or shattered. They clustered around him as he dismounted, the air thick with the scent of oil and anticipation. Duke pulled the napkin from his pocket, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom of honor. "This hit last night. Girl named Mia. Man's in custody, but her story's got holes. Says he snatched her to silence her mom. We don't walk away from this." Jack spat into the dust, his eyes narrowing. "Cops handle their own. Why us?" "Because the system's got rust," Duke replied, voice steady as the desert wind. "And we've got promises. Mia's mom could be anyone caught in something ugly. We find her. We end it right." Lena stepped forward, her gaze sharp. "Kid's got signs of distress, you said. I'll ride with the medkit. If it's a ring, we need proof, not just fists." She'd lost a sister to shadows like these, back when the world turned blind. Her loyalty ran deep, a quiet river carving stone. Preacher nodded, clapping Duke on the shoulder. "Words out. 20 more en route. We move smart. Scout first, then converge. For the girl, for the code." The group murmured assent, the bond tightening like a chain link forged in fire. Duke felt the weight lift, shared among them, the chosen family that had pulled him from the bottle's edge, given him purpose in the roar of the road. They prepped in efficient silence, mapping routes on a battered table, loading saddlebags with water, tools, and the unyielding resolve of men and women who'd stared down worse than midnight strangers. As noon crested, engines ignited in a symphony of power, the convoy forming like a steel serpent uncoiling. Duke led, Mia's napkin tucked safe, the highway ahead, a vein pulsing with justice. But in the rear view, doubts flickered, a whisper of corruption, hints from Preacher's quick dig pointing to a local figure with deep pockets and deeper secrets. The ride wasn't just for rescue. It was a reckoning, testing the promise that had survived wars and wanderings. The sun beat down, relentless, but Duke rode on, the wind carrying him toward the heart of the storm, where loyalty would clash with the dark underbelly of forgotten towns. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The convoy thundered out of the outpost like a living beast, 20 Harleys snarling in unison, their exhaust a deep bellow that scattered birds from the mesquite branches. Dust devils swirled in their wake, the sun's glare turning the Badlands into a furnace of gold and shadow. Duke rode point, his broad back cutting the wind, the viper patch on his vest fluttering like a banner of defiance. Behind him, the crew fanned out in a V formation, Jax on his left flank, Lena to the right, Preacher anchoring the rear with his steady gaze scanning the horizon. The road twisted southward, toward the coastal fringes where Mia's story hinted at deeper roots. A town called Harbor's Edge, whispered in Preacher's intel as a nest of quiet corruption. The air grew thicker as they descended, carrying the brine of the sea mingled with the acrid bite of refineries on the outskirts. Duke's mind raced ahead, piecing fragments. Mia's bruise, the man's evasive mutterings to the cops before they hauled him away, and now Preacher's fragmented leads. A missing persons report buried in local files, a single mother who'd vanished weeks ago, her workplace a dingy motel off the interstate. It smelled of leverage, of someone pulling strings from the shadows, using the vulnerable as pawns in games of power. Duke's grip tightened on the handlebars, the leather gloves creaking. His brother's voice echoed again, a ghost in the engine's roar. "Promises ain't paper, Duke. They're the weight you carry when the light fades." They hit Harbor's Edge by early afternoon, the town unfolding like a faded postcard. Salt-eaten, clappered houses lining streets that ended at a restless grey ocean. Fishermen mended nets on weathered docks, their faces etched with the salt of hard lives, while gulls wheeled overhead, crying warnings into the wind. The vipers pulled into a deserted lot behind an old cannery, engines cutting off one by one in a cascading silence, broken only by the lap of waves against pilings. Duke dismounted, boots thudding on cracked concrete, and scanned the group. Sweat beaded on brows, but eyes burned with purpose. No questions, no hesitation. This was the family forged in fire, the ones who'd stood with him when the VA turned its back, when nightmares clawed him awake in motel rooms smelling of stale smoke. "Split up," Duke said, voice low as he unfolded a hand-drawn map on his tank. "Jax, Lena, check the motel on Elm. Preacher, you and me hit the precinct. Rest of you, eyes open, low profile. We're ghosts until we know the play." Nods rippled through the crew, a silent oath. Lena slung her medkit over her shoulder, her expression a mask of quiet steel. She'd patched more than wounds in her time with the Vipers, mending the fractures of souls adrift. Jax cracked his knuckles, a grin flashing white against his sun-darkened skin. "If it's dirty, we clean it. For the kid." As the pairs peeled off, Duke and Preacher walked the main drag, the sun dipping toward the water, casting long shadows that danced like uneasy spectres. The precinct was a squat brick building, its sign faded, windows barred against the salt air. Inside, the air hummed with fluorescent hum and the murmur of radios. A desk sergeant looked up, his uniform rumpled, eyes narrowing at the two bikers filling the doorway, leather, patches, the faint scent of road dust clinging to them. "Help you." The sergeant grunted, not rising. Duke leaned on the counter, his presence a calm pressure. Mia Calder, brought in last night from the diner up north. Her mom's name came up. Elena Calder. Heard she's local. Missing. The sergeant's face tightened, a flicker of something, guilt, evasion, crossing his features before he schooled it. Files are confidential. You her kin. Preacher stepped forward, his voice smooth as oiled leather. Just concerned citizens. Girls scared, man's talking in circles. If Elena's in trouble, we can help point the way. The sergeant hesitated, fingers drumming on a keyboard. After a beat, he slid a printout across, redacted but enough. Elena Calder, 28, reported missing 3 weeks prior from the Seaview Motel. Last seen arguing with a local associate. No leads, case stalled. Duke memorized the details, the motel's address burning into his mind. Appreciate it, he said, turning away, but Preacher lingered, his gaze locking with the man's. Something off here, Preacher murmured as they exited, the door swinging shut behind them like a withheld confession. That pause. He knows more. Smells like palms greased. Duke nodded, the sea wind whipping his hair. They mounted up and rode to the motel, a sagging 2-story affair with peeling paint and a neon sign flickering vacancy like a lie. The parking lot was half empty, weeds pushing through cracks. The ocean's roar a constant underscore. Jax and Lena were already there. Speaking low to a housekeeper outside room 12, Elena's last known. The woman, wiry and weathered, glanced nervously over her shoulder. She was quiet, the housekeeper said, voice hushed against the wind. Worked nights, kept to herself. Then one evening raised voices, her and some suit from town, fancy car. Next day, gone. Left her shift early, kid in tow sometimes. Mia, right? Sweet thing. Lena's eyes softened. Any idea who the suit was? A shrug, but her gaze darted to a nearby diner across the street. Heard talk. Harlan Voss runs the docks, got fingers in everything, but saying that gets you looks you don't want. The name hit like a cold wave. Preacher pulled out his phone, cross-referencing quick. Voss, a mid-level operator with ties to shipping. Whispers of side deals that skirted the edges of the law. Missing persons in his wake, questions vanishing like mist. Duke's jaw set, the promise coiling tighter in his gut. This wasn't random. It was a thread in a noose, tightening around the innocent. As dusk bled purple across the sky, the crew reconvened in the lot, sharing intel in murmurs. Engines idled low, ready. Voss's compound's on the bluff, Jack said, pointing north. We ride careful, scout, not storm. Get eyes on Elena. Pull her out clean. Duke looked to the group, the fading light gilding their faces, loyal faces chosen in the crucible of loss. His own scars itched, reminders of battles where brothers fell, where he'd sworn never to turn blind. For Mia, he said simply, for the word we gave. The convoy reformed, headlights piercing the twilight like stars falling to earth. They rolled toward the bluff, the road climbing steep, the sea crashing below in rhythmic fury. Tension built with each mile, the air electric with unspoken dilemmas. Confront a man with power, risk the fragile peace they'd carved from chaos. But honor demanded it, the quiet stand against the tide of indifference. In the lead, Duke felt the weight of the napkin still in his pocket, a talisman of redemption. The night deepened, promising clashes not of fists, but of wills, where truth would carve the path forward or break them all. The bluff rose like a jagged scar against the twilight sky, its edges crumbling into the churning sea below, where waves hurled themselves against rocks in endless, furious protest. Duke throttled back as the convoy crested the final rise, the Harley's growl softening to a predatory purr, headlights dimmed to slits that barely pierced the gathering gloom. The air up here was sharper, laced with the metallic tang of salt spray and the faint, oily whisper of hidden machinery from Voss's compound. a sprawling complex of warehouses and chain-link fences perched like a vulture over harbor's edge. Floodlights swept lazy arcs across the perimeter, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced with the wind whipping off the ocean. Duke signaled a halt at the tree line, where scrub pine and twisted junipers offered scant cover. The crew dismounted in silence, boots sinking into the soft earth. The only sounds the distant crash of surf and the creak of leather as they gathered close. Jax crouched low, his massive frame coiled like a spring, while Lena adjusted her medkit with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the layout with a medic's precision. Preacher flanked Duke, his Bible tucked into his vest like a concealed weapon, murmuring a quiet prayer under his breath, not for victory, but for clarity in the moral fog ahead. "Scout pairs," Duke whispered, his voice blending with the rustle of leaves. "Eyes only. No engagement till we know where she is. Voss plays dirty, we play smart." The group nodded, the bond humming between them like the vibration of idling engines left behind. This wasn't about storming gates or spilling blood. It was the quiet fulfillment of a vow, the kind that had stitched Duke's fractured life back together after the war's shrapnel tore through his unit, leaving him with ghosts and a limp that ached in the damp. The Vipers were his redemption, riders who'd chosen him as kin when blood family lay buried under foreign soil. Jax and Lena slipped into the underbrush first, vanishing like smoke toward the eastern fence. Duke and Preacher took the western approach, moving with the deliberate grace of men who'd patrolled shadows before badges meant anything. The fence loomed ahead, razor wire glinting under the lights, but a gap yawned where erosion had eaten the base, enough for a man to squeeze through if he didn't mind the scrape. Duke went first, his broad shoulders forcing the wire aside with a faint twang that set his teeth on edge. Inside, the compound sprawled, stacks of crates stamped with generic shipping labels, the hum of generators underscoring the isolation. A guard shack sat empty, its door ajar, a half-smoked cigarette smoldering in an ashtray. Sloppy or a trap? They hugged the warehouse walls, the corrugated metal cool against Duke's palm, its surface pitted from years of sea air. Faint voices drifted from around the corner, gruff tones laced with impatience, followed by the clink of chains. Duke's heart thudded steady, the napkin in his pocket a talisman pressing against his chest. Mia's face flickered in his mind, those wide eyes trusting a stranger in a diner, pulling him into this web. He signaled Preacher to hold, then peered around the edge. In a floodlit yard, two figures stood over a chained door to what looked like a storage bunker. One was Voss himself, tall and lean, dressed in a tailored coat that screamed ill-gotten polish, his face hawkish under the brim of a fedora. The other, a burly enforcer with a scarred neck, nodded deferentially. Between them, half-shadowed, was a woman, Elena Calder. Duke knew it instantly from the photo Preacher had pulled up earlier. Her hair was matted, clothes rumpled, but she held her chin high, defiance etching lines around her mouth, even as her wrists bore the faint marks of restraint. "You think you can bury this?" Elena's voice carried sharp as shattered glass. "Mia's out there. She'll talk. The whole thing unravels. Your shipments, the threats, all of it." Voss chuckled, low and venomous, stepping closer. "Kids forget. And loose ends. They get tied off. You should have stayed quiet at the motel, Elena. Now your girl's a liability too." He gestured to the enforcer, who unlocked the door with a heavy scrape, revealing a dim interior stacked with suspicious crates. Whispers of contraband, deals that preyed on the desperate, using folks like Elena as shields. Duke's blood ran hot, the old promise surging like adrenaline. This was the corruption he'd sworn to counter, the kind that twisted justice into knots, leaving families like his brother's shattered. Preacher's hand gripped his arm, a silent anchor. Act now, and they risked her. Wait, and the noose tightened. They pulled back, melting into the shadows as Jax's low whistle signaled from across the yard. Rendezvous at the fence. The crew regrouped in the tree line, breaths ragged but controlled, the sea's roar masking their words. "She's alive," Duke said, mapping the bunker's position in the dirt with a stick. "Voss is holding her as leverage. Something about shipments. Guards are light, but that changes at shift." Jax's fists clenched, his loyalty afire, banked but ready. "We hit fast. Cut the power. Grab her, out before they blink." Lena shook her head, her healer's instinct prevailing. "Not without a plan for Mia. If we spook Voss, he could have eyes on the kid already. Cops were dragging their feet. This ties to why." Preacher nodded, his calm voice threading the tension. "It's a moral bind, brothers. Rush in blind, we become the chaos. But leave her. That's breaking the code." Duke stood, the wind tugging at his vest, carrying the salt of resolve. Memories flooded. His brother, chained by circumstance in that ambush. His last words a plea for the vulnerable. No one left behind. Not Elena, not Mia, not the promise that had forged the Vipers from wanderers into warriors of quiet honor. "We wait for dark. Lena, signal the rest of the crew. Full muster, but perimeter only. Jax, rig a distraction at the gate. Preacher, you and me go in. Clean extraction. For the girl, for the word we keep." As the sun dipped fully, painting the bluff in bruised purples, the crew dispersed with purpose, the air electric with unspoken oaths. Duke knelt by his bike, checking the chain, the familiar ritual grounding him amid the storm. This ride wasn't vengeance, it was redemption's edge, where loyalty clashed with power's shadow, testing if promises could outlast the night. Engines whispered to life in the distance. Brothers converging unseen, the family chosen ready to stand. The compound lights flickered mockingly, but Duke's gaze held steady, the weight of honor pulling him forward into the gathering dark. If this tale of unbreakable bonds is stirring something in you, smash that like button. It helps spread these stories of quiet courage far and wide. The moon hung low over the bluff like a tarnished silver coin, its pale light fracturing on the waves far below, where the sea gnawed at the cliffs in relentless hunger. Darkness had settled thick as oil across Voss's compound, the floodlights now dimmed to a sullen glow, casting pools of yellow that barely reached the shadows where the iron vipers waited. Duke crouched in the underbrush, the damp earth soaking through his knees, the scent of pine sap and salt mingling with the faint, acrid whiff of diesel from the generators humming in the distance. His breath came even, measured, the old war rhythm syncing with the pulse in his veins. A cadence learned in foxholes where hesitation meant loss, where promises were etched in blood and silence. Preacher knelt beside him, his silhouette a lean outline against the night, fingers tracing the edge of his knife, not for threat, but for the comfort of readiness. The crew had fanned out like ghosts, Jax and a handful of riders positioned at the perimeter gate. Their distraction a low rumble of idling engines masked as distant traffic. Lena with the medics in the tree line, her kit open, bandages and sedatives at the ready for whatever scars this night would leave. The air crackled with tension, not the explosive kind of barroom brawls, but the ethical wire they walked. Extract Elena without becoming the monsters Voss painted them as. Honor the vow without shattering the fragile line between justice and chaos. Duke checked his watch, the glow faint under his sleeve. Just past midnight. The shift change was due, guards rotating like clockwork in their complacency. "Now," he murmured, voice a gravel whisper that blended with the wind. They moved as one, slipping through the eroded gap in the fence, the razor wire snagging at Duke's sleeve like greedy fingers. Inside, the compound felt alive in its stillness, crates looming like silent monoliths, the faint clatter of a loose chain echoing from the bunker. Footsteps approached from the guard shack, two shadows merging under a light. The scarred enforcer from earlier, barking orders to a younger patrolman, their voices carrying snippets of boredom and bravado. Preacher signaled, a subtle hand motion honed from years of shadowed ops. They pressed against the warehouse wall, the metal cold and unyielding, Duke's heart steady, but his mind a storm of flashes. Mia's trembling hand in the diner, Elena's defiant chin in the yard, his brother's final gasp under a foreign sky. Keep the light on for them, Duke, the ones who can't. That light was the Viper's code, the chosen family that had dragged him from the abyss after the ambush. When shrapnel stole his stride and grief nearly stole his soul, no one left behind, not in war, not on these forgotten roads. The guards passed, cigarettes glowing like fireflies, oblivious to the predators in the dark. Duke and Preacher darted forward, boots silent on the gravel, reaching the bunker's chained door. The lock was heavy, industrial, but Jax's prep work, a slim tool slipped earlier by a scout, made quick work of it. The chains slithered free with a muffled rasp, and Duke eased the door open, the hinges protesting softly like a held breath released. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the must of confinement and the faint underlying rot of fear sweat. Dim bulbs strung overhead flickered, illuminating Elena slumped on a cot in the corner, her wrists raw from makeshift bonds, eyes widening as the door creaked. "Who?" she started, voice hoarse, scrambling back until recognition dawned. The photo Preacher had shown, the diner tale murmured through the crew's network. It clicked. The bikers, Mia. She made it? Duke knelt slowly, his massive frame folding with deliberate gentleness, hands open to show no threat. "She's safe. Hospital's got her now, waiting for you. We're getting you out." Preacher moved to her side, slicing the ties with his knife, the blade glinting brief as a vow. Elena rubbed her wrists, wincing at the chafe, but her gaze held steel, a mother's fire, unquenched by weeks of isolation. "Voss," she whispered, glancing toward the door. "He runs the docks for bigger fish, smuggling, debts. I saw too much at the motel, packages, payoffs. He took Mia to shut me up, threatened worse if I spoke." Her words tumbled out, laced with the desperation of truths long buried, painting a web of corruption that snaked through harbor's edge. Local cops on strings, shipments vanishing into the night, families like hers collateral in the grind of greed. Duke helped her to her feet, her slight weight leaning into his arm, the contact a bridge across the chasm of strangers turned allies. "We end it clean. No blood on our hands unless he forces it." But as they stepped toward the exit, a shout pierced the night, Jax's distraction erupting at the gate. Engines revving high, the crash of a toppled barrel echoing like thunder. Alarms wailed, shrill and urgent, floodlights snapping to full blaze, turning the yard into a stark stage. Guards swarmed, Voss's voice barking from a radio. "Secure the perimeter! Someone's inside!" Footsteps pounded closer, the enforcer's bulk rounding the corner, pistol drawn. Duke shoved Elena behind him, the wall of his body a shield, while Preacher drew his own sidearm, not to kill but to warn, the moral line blurring under pressure. "Back off," Duke growled, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "She's walking out. This ends now." The enforcer hesitated, eyes flicking between them, sweat gleaming on his scarred neck. Voss emerged from the shadows then, coat flapping like raven wings, his hawkish face twisted in fury. "You think you can waltz in here, biker trash? This town's mine. Cops'll bury you for trespassing." But Duke saw the crack, the flicker of fear in Voss's eyes, the web trembling at exposure. Eleanor stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not anymore." Mia's note started it, truths out. Outside, the Viper's engines roared to life, a symphony of loyalty converging, tires screeching, headlights blazing as the crew closed the net without crossing into violence. Jax's voice boomed over the din. "Stand down, or we ride this bluff into the sea." The standoff hung electric. The sea's crash underscoring the heartbeat of decision. Duke held Voss's gaze, the promise burning bright. Redemption not in fists, but in the unyielding stand, the family chosen proving stronger than chains of power. Voss's bluff cracked first, hands rising slow, enforcer mirroring. Take her, but this ain't over. Duke guided Elena out, the crew enveloping them like wings, bikes forming a protective ring as they retreated to the tree line. The wind carried the salt of escape, the first hints of dawn gilding the horizon. But in Duke's pocket, the napkin felt heavier still, a spark to embers, for Voss's threats lingered, the larger web demanding one final reckoning. The ride back would test them, loyalty's fire forging the path home. The first light of dawn clawed its way over the bluff, turning the sea from ink to molten silver, its waves still crashing below like the fading echoes of the night's fury. Duke's Harley led the convoy down the winding road from Voss's compound, Elena Calder clinging to his back, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, the warmth of her breath a fragile rhythm against the chill wind. The Iron Vipers thrummed behind them in tight formation, 20 engines a low, unified growl that warded off pursuit, chrome flashing in the early glow like badges of unbowed resolve. Dust and salt spray kicked up in their wake, the air thick with the scent of freedom earned hard, exhaust mingled with the sharp brine of the ocean, undercut by the faint lingering tang of tension sweat from the standoff. Elena's voice broke through the roar, faint but clear near Duke's ear. "Mia, is she really safe? Voss, he has ways. People in his pocket." Her words carried the weight of weeks in chains, a mother's fear honed to a blade's edge, but there was gratitude too, woven into the tremor, a quiet acknowledgement of the strangers who'd become saviors in the dark. Duke kept his eyes on the road, the handlebars steady under his gloved hands, the vibration traveling up his arms like a pulse of affirmation. Hospital in the next town over. Vipers have eyes there. Lena's already calling ahead. Kid's tough. She reached out. That's half the battle. His mind replayed the extraction. Voss's retreat, the enforcer's holstered gun, the crew's encirclement turning the tide without a shot fired. It was the code in action, justice not as a hammer, but as an unyielding wall, echoing the promise he'd made over his brother's grave, where smoke still curled from the earth, and loss carved hollows that time couldn't fill. The Vipers weren't vigilantes. They were the family he'd chosen when blood ran thin. Riders who'd pulled him from the bottle's grip after the war, forging bonds stronger than steel in the forge of shared silences. Preacher rode flank, his bike pulling even for a moment, face etched with the calm of a man who'd wrestled demons and won. Radio chatter's quiet, no tales yet, but Voss don't fold easy. That web he spins. Motel payoffs, dock deals. Elena, you got names? Faces? She nodded against Duke's shoulder, the motion small but resolute. The sergeant at the precinct, Martinez. He turned a blind eye when I reported the threats. And there's a lawyer, slick type from the city, handling the shipments. Voss called him the fixer. They use folks like me, single mums, desperate shifts, to mule small runs, silence us with fear. Her confessions spilled like rain on parched ground, each word a thread unraveling the corruption that had ensnared Harbour's edge, turning a sleepy port into a shadow of itself. Duke felt the old fire stir, not rage, but the steady burn of purpose, the same that had rebuilt him after shrapnel stole his stride, after nights staring at the ceiling while ghosts whispered regrets. The convoy hit the highway proper as the sun crested fully, bathing the asphalt in gold, the desert giving way to scrubland dotted with wildflowers nodding in the breeze. Jax's voice crackled over the comms, laced with his gravelly humour masking the edge. "Eyes sharp, brothers. Scout reports a black SUV peeling out from the bluff. Voss's boys likely. We ride tight to the hospital, then regroup." Lena chimed in from the rear, her tone clipped with medic's efficiency. Elena's holding. Dehydration, minor strains, nothing a rest won't mend. But Mia needs her mom whole. Duke throttled up. The Harley responding with a surge that pressed Elena closer, her trust a weight he carried lightly. Memories flickered with the miles, the diner door locking with that decisive click, Mia's napkin unfolding like fate's hand, the convoy's thunder from the outpost, pulling him from isolation into action. This was redemption's rhythm, the quiet fulfillment of oaths that survived wars and wanderings, binding the Vipers as kin not by birth, but by the scars they shared. His own limp ached faintly in the damp morning air, a reminder of the ambush that took his brother, the vow born in blood. Watch the small ones, the broken ones, the ones the world overlooked. By mid-morning they rolled into the outskirts of Safe Haven, a nondescript town with a hospital that squatted like a beacon amid strip malls and faded billboards. The parking lot filled with Harleys as the crew pulled in, a steel phalanx drawing stares from early shift nurses peering through windows. Duke dismounted first, helping Elena down with a gentleness that belied his bulk, her legs unsteady, but her eyes alight as the automatic doors hissed open. Inside, the sterile hum of fluorescence and the sharp scent of antiseptic greeted them, a far cry from the bluff's shadows. Mia waited in a private room, courtesy of Viper connections, curled on the bed with a stuffed bear clutched tight, her bruise fading to yellow under the soft light. When Eleanor entered, the girl's face crumpled, a sob escaping as she launched into her mother's arms. Duke hung back in the doorway, Preacher at his side, the scene unfolding like a frame from some redemption reel. Tears and whispers, the unbreakable thread of blood mending under watchful eyes. Lena moved in quietly, checking vitals with a nod of approval, her own losses. A sister vanished to similar shadows, fueling the healer's touch. But peace was fleeting. Jax burst in minutes later. Phone in hand, face thunderous. Voss ain't done, called in favors, precincts issuing warrants for us. Vigilante incursion, as they say. Martinez is leading the charge, spinning it like we're the threat. The room tensed, Elena pulling Mia closer, the air thickening with the ethical storm Duke had sensed brewing. Voss's web lashed back, corruption's tendrils reaching to paint saviors as sinners, testing the Viper's code against a system rusted through. Duke's jaw set, the napkin from the diner now a relic in his pocket, its ink faded, but its call undimmed. We don't run. Preacher, rally the crew, outpost by noon. Elena, Mia, you ride with us till it's clear. This ends at the source. His voice carried the weight of the promise, the loyalty that had forged them. A stand against the tide, where honor's quiet actions rippled into legacies. Outside, engines revved anew, the sun climbing higher, pulling them toward the final clash. Not with fists, but with the unyielding truth of bonds that outlasted the dark. The hospital faded in the rear view, but the fire burned brighter, redemption's road stretching ahead, one vow at a time. The sun climbed mercilessly toward noon, turning the highway into a ribbon of shimmering heat that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Duke's convoy sliced through it, Harley's humming in disciplined harmony, Elena and Mia secured in the center. Mother and daughter side by side on Lena's bike, the girl's small hands gripping her mum's waist, the wind tousling their hair into a banner of fragile reunion. The air whipped past with the sharp bite of sage and sun-baked asphalt, carrying the faint, underlying rumble of pursuit that Jax's scouts had confirmed. Black SUVs trailing at a distance, Voss's hounds sniffing for weakness. But the Vipers rode unbowed, a steel serpent bound by oaths deeper than the desert roots, Duke at the point like a compass needle drawn to reckoning. He glanced in the rear view, catching Elena's profile, lines of exhaustion etched deep, but her eyes held a spark reignited, the quiet fire of survival. Mia's laughter, tentative at first, had bubbled up miles back, a sound like rain on tin after drought, chasing shadows from the girl's face. It stirred something in Duke, an echo of his brother's grin amid the dust of training camps before the world shattered it. That promise, "Watch the small ones," had pulled him from the wreckage, from VA waiting rooms that smelled of despair and defeat, into the brotherhood of the road. The Vipers weren't born of blood, they were chosen in the crucible of loss. Ex-soldiers and strays who'd traded isolation for the thunder of engines and the weight of shared vows. Now that family stretched the miles, 20 strong and growing, alerts rippling through their network to call in reinforcements from distant chapters. Preacher pulled alongside as they neared the outskirts of Iron Ridge, the Vipers' neutral ground, a dusty crossroads town with a weathered saloon serving as their unofficial hall, its neon sign flickering last chance like a wry prophecy. "Warrants alive!" he shouted over the roar, wind snatching at his words. Martinez leaked the story, painting us as raiders, Voss as the victim, media's sniffing, could tie up the roads. His face, lined from sermons delivered under starlit skies, held no fear, only the steady resolve of a man who'd buried too many to flinch at bureaucracy's bite. Duke nodded, throttling back to signal the pull-off. The crew banked into a gravel lot behind the saloon, engines cutting off in a cascading hush, broken by the distant hum of cicadas and the ocean's faint echo miles away. Dust settled like a veil, the air thick with the scent of cooling metal and sun-warmed earth. They dismounted in a loose circle, Jax cracking open a saddlebag for water bottles, Lena checking Mia's color with a mother's vigilance borrowed from her own ghosts. Elena knelt by her daughter, smoothing tangled hair, their whispers a private balm amid the group's quiet tension. "We face it head-on," Duke said, a voice gravel steady as he unfolded the crumpled napkin from his pocket, its ink now a faint scar on the paper. He held it up, the 5 words a talisman drawing eyes, Mia's plea, the spark that had ignited this ride. Voss and Martinez, they're linked. Elena's got the details. We take it to the feds, not the locals. Clean exposure, no more shadows. The crew murmured assent, loyalty coiling tight like a chain around a broken link. Jax spat into the dust, his enforcer's bulk shifting. "If they block the road, we don't fight. We record. Truth's our weapon." Elena rose, Mia's hand in hers, her voice cutting through the heat like a cool stream. "The lawyer, Reardon, he handles the books. I signed papers under duress, saw manifests for the shipments. Drugs masked as fish crates, payoffs to silence witnesses. Martinez takes cuts, Voss runs the muscle. Give me a recorder, and I'll lay it out." Her eyes met Duke's, gratitude mingling with determination, a bond forged in midnight rescues, stronger than fear's grip. Preacher pulled a small device from his vest, its lens glinting like justice's eye, and they huddled under the saloon's awning. Elena's testimony spilling in measured tones, dates blurred by captivity but etched in memory, names dropped like stones in a still pond, ripples promising to drown the corrupt. As she spoke, the first sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flickering on the horizon like false dawn. Martinez's play, squad cars blocking the interstate, spinning the Vipers as fugitives in a bid to bury the truth. But Duke had anticipated. Scouts had looped in a federal contact, a straight arrow agent from an old Viper favor, her number etched in Preacher's Bible margins. The call went out as the convoy reformed, engines growling low, Elena's recording uploaded to secure channels. The Fed's response crackled back. En route, warrants flipping like cards in a rigged game. The standoff unfolded at the crossroads, squad cars forming a hasty barricade under the relentless sun, Martinez stepping out with a megaphone, his uniform crisp but his eyes darting like a cornered fox. "Iron Vipers, stand down! You're under arrest for kidnapping and trespass!" His voice boomed, but the crew held formation. bikes idling in a wall of chrome and resolve, no aggression, just unyielding presence. Duke rode forward alone, hands visible, the napkin tucked away, but its weight eternal. "Check your radio, Sergeant. Things just changed." Moments stretched taut as federal vans crested the rise, tires crunching gravel, agents spilling out with badges flashing brighter than the badges Martinez hid behind. The recording played from Preacher's phone, Eleanor's voice clear and damning, weaving the web, Voss's threats, Martinez's complicity, the shipments preying on the towns forgotten. Whispers rippled through the cops, some shifting uneasy, others paling as the feds cuffed Martinez on the spot, his protests dissolving into sputters. Voss, holed up in his bluff office, watched his empire crumble via helicopter feed, the fixer Reardon already cutting deals in a distant cell. As the dust cleared, the barricade parted, the Vipers rolling through unscathed, Mia waving from Lena's bike with a grin that split the morning wide. Duke led them back toward Safe Haven, the hospital now a waypoint to a new start, witness protection whispers for Elena and Mia, the Vipers' network, ensuring safe passage, the road unspooled forgiving, the sun dipping toward afternoon, gilding the chrome in hues of earned peace. Duke felt the limp ease in the warmth, scars fading like old ink, the promise fulfilled not in glory, but in the quiet stand that mended what corruption tore. By evening, at a roadside overlook where the sea met the sky in a blaze of orange, the crew gathered one last time. Elena hugged Duke fiercely, Mia pressing a drawing into his hand, a crude biker on a roaring machine saving the day. "You kept your word," Elena said, voice thick, "in a world that breaks them." Preacher clapped shoulders. Jax shared a rare, quiet laugh. Lena packed her kit with a nod of closure. The Vipers were family eternal, bonds of loyalty outlasting the ride, redemption woven into every mile. Duke watched them mount up, engines igniting in farewell thunder, the horizon calling each to their paths. He lingered, the napkin finally released to the wind, its message carried on the breeze, a vow renewed, not ended. In the gathering dusk, the road whispered of more shadows, more small ones needing light. But for now, honor stood tall, the chosen family's legacy a quiet roar against the cynical night. The engine fired, and Duke rode into the fading light, the promise alive in the hum of the highway, pulling him forward, one honorable turn at a time. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable promises and chosen kin. If stories like Duke's, of quiet courage and moral fire, resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and join the Brotherhood. We'll see you on the next road.